Hi, I'm dealing with the essay What is Enlightenment by Michel Foucault. The essay is written in two parts. The first part is a kind of analysis of Kant's essay titled What is Enlightenment, and the second part is about Baudelaire's concept of modernity and Foucault's take on enlightenment. The question, what is enlightenment, has troubled philosophers for almost 2 centuries. Kant is not the only one who tried to reflect on enlightenment. There were other philosophers, like the Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, who tried to do the same. So, what makes Kant's text so different from that of others is what Foucault analyzes in the first part. The first or major reason is that Kant defines enlightenment in a totally new way. Enlightenment is defined as a way out or as an exit by Kant. He analyzes the present on the basis of a difference, that is, how is today different from yesterday? For Kant, enlightenment is two things. First, enlightenment is a process that releases us from our status of immaturity. Immaturity is when we let others use their reason for us, like a dietitian deciding what we should eat. This immaturity is self-incurred. Second, enlightenment is when we change our pre-existing relation using our reason, will, and authority. Any relation with our friends, relation with our family, any relation, if we try to change those relationship according to using our reason, will, and authority, that is when we are enlightened. Foucault points out certain ambiguities in Kant's text. The first one is that enlightenment is seen both as a process and a task. It comes with a motto, dare to know. People who are enlightened are those who had dared to know, used their reason to change something. Since we are responsible for our own immaturity, we are responsible for our own enlightenment too. So it is a task that we have to take up individually. At the same time, Kant portrays enlightenment as a phenomenon in which people take part collectively. A person is both an agent and benefactor. The second ambiguity is in the use of the word mankind. Does Kant refer to entire human race, or does he mean the humanity of human beings? If it is the first one, then enlightenment is a political change. If it is the second, enlightenment is more a moral change. So what kind of change is Kant talking about? The next ambiguity is when he describes certain conditions to attain enlightenment. Like you need to distinguish between realm of reason and realm of obedience. In a mature state, people obey first and then make use of their reason. In order to use proper reason, you need to obey to the rules. He also makes a distinction between public reason and private reason. Private reason is when you use reason as a cog in a machine. That is, you are part of a larger system called society and you use reason according to the circumstances. Public reason is when you use reason as a reasonable being. Free use of reason. So the question Foucault puts forward is, how can we dare to know when we are obeying scrupulously? If laws bind us, how can we make free and willing use of reason? Then Foucault connects Kant's concept of enlightenment with his three critiques: critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, and critique of judgment. According to Kant, legitimate use of reason leads to autonomy. It would make us self-sufficient, while illegitimate use of reason would lead to dogmatism. Kant's critiques would help us to use reason legitimately. Hence, enlightenment and critiques are closely related. They are more like reciprocal in nature. Reciprocal in the sense that Critiques are a product of enlightened age of enlightenment. While in order to use reason legitimately in an age of enlightenment, we need to be guided by the critics. Kant's essay is important as he looks at contemporary world as a difference from yesterday. Enlightenment is at the same time seen as a specific moment which is different from the past and also as a motive for change. This idea of enlightenment is very similar to Baudelaire's concept of modernity. Modernity is often seen as an era or a time period which is preceded by pre-modern period and succeeded by postmodern period. This kind of understanding often makes people ask the question whether modernity is a sequel to enlightenment or is it a rupture. Baudelaire sees or conceives modernity more as an attitude or an ethos. Modernity is an attitude. It is the way we see the world around us, the way we think, feel, and act upon it. So, what characterizes this attitude of modernity? First, the present is ephemeral and fleeting. We should be able to grasp the heroic aspect of the present or heroize the present. It means that we would be able to understand the essential reasons behind every moment, understand why every moment is so. A modernist or a person with an attitude of modernity would cherish every small incident. The example he gives is that of a painter. If a painter can portray the deep and obsessive relation of the 19th century with death, then he has this attitude. Heroization doesn't mean that they try to maintain it or make it permanent, but each moment is grasped and respected in its own form and then transformed without destroying it. Like making it come alive, like adding life to it. Something beautiful is transformed into more beautiful thing. For example, a picture of a beggar sitting on the streets would make us feel sympathetic to him, although when we see that beggar directly, we would be oblivious to his presence. So that is what a painter or modernist does to an event or an something that happened in the past. The third point is the attitude is an attitude to oneself. The person should be aware and accept the fact that at each moment he is subjected to change. He always tries to reinvent himself. And thus, each man is a work of art. Finally, Baudelaire says that the heroization, transformation of reality, and reinvention of self happens only in one place, that is, art. Foucault wrote this essay to analyze how one way of philosophical interrogation or understanding of self as an autonomous being and a relation with presence is rooted in enlightenment. But what connects us to enlightenment, according to Foucault, is not faithfulness to some doctrines which would help us to find autonomy like the critics, but the continuous reactivation of an attitude. Then he goes on to describe this attitude negatively and positively. To describe something positively means to describe it by stating the presence of things. To give an example, if I have to describe alien, I would be describing it by saying that alien is evil, destructive, disoriented, it has supernatural powers, etc. To describe it negatively is to describe it by stating the absence of things, what it is not. To say alien is not beautiful, they are not like humans, it does not have morals, ethics, or the things that make us human. This is how we describe something negatively. So Foucault describes this attitude that would make us enlightened in both negatively and positively. Negatively, what does not characterize this attitude? The attitude is not caught in the blackmail of Enlightenment rationality. We need not be for or against Enlightenment. We are historically determined by Enlightenment to a great extent, but we need not try to define ourselves according to it anymore. Foucault asks us to analyze ourselves according to our contemporary limits, define ourselves as autonomous beings by discarding what can be discarded. If Enlightenment rationality doesn't allow you to define yourselves completely, then discard it. Enlightenment rationality is centered on prominence of reason and evidences based on senses as primary sources. You need not always be completely rational or vice versa. We have to accept that there are shades of grey in between spaces, thus get away from the blackmail of Enlightenment rationality. Second point is that Enlightenment and humanism are not the same. Enlightenment is an event which involves a change in society, a transformation in science and technology, etc. While humanism is like a theme that colors the conception of man, it is inconsistent and has changed over time. It has taken many forms like Christian humanism, suspicious humanism, which was against the scientific, which was always suspicious of the scientific inventions. Marxism was a kind of humanism, etc. Humanism and enlightenment are not the same. Then, positively, what is this attitude? It always moves toward change. This attitude always tries to attain change. It should aim at transgressing limits to achieve positive things or positive change. We should approach things genealogically and use archaeological method. That is, instead of taking things for granted, we should have a critical attitude towards everything. We should try to understand what made us what we are today. For this, we should search into the past so deeply that we can no longer be the same person or settle for the given facts. Thus, we'll continually be crossing limits or redefining ourselves, constantly moving towards change, like a modern man who constantly reinvents himself. Then, the attitude should be specific, local, and individual, and not general and universal. Changes in the ground level are more positive. We should know where change is possible and what kind of change is possible. And we cannot completely determine the limits that we have to transgress. The limits are always changing, and hence we are always at the beginning. Enlightenment itself is an unfinished project. That does not mean that we shouldn't begin at all, but the method that Foucault suggests has its own stakes, homogeneity, systematicity, and generality. Now we'll discuss each of these points separately. Stakes literally means risk or wager. We thought that growth of technology would bring us autonomy, but now the relation between the two are more complex. By technology, Foucault intends the technology of self, how we have developed ourselves to what we are today. So, in order to analyze ourselves better, we need to disconnect technology and power relations. Then, homogeneity. How do we bring about a homogeneous method of analysis? Practical systems would ensure homogeneity, that is, by taking a homogeneous reference of what people do and how they do it. What people do is the technological side, the rationality they put into it, like the rules of a game, like Lang. How they do it is the strategic side, how they modify the rules of game for practical purpose according to the players on the other side. Example can be the game itself, parole, the performance. Number 3, systematicity. It means a methodical way of performance, the ability to work as a system. The systematic performance of the practical systems are ensured by asking questions like how are we constituted as subject of our own knowledge, as subject that exercise or submit to power relation, as subject of our own action. That is, when we analyze ourselves, always take into consideration the three axes: axis of knowledge, axis of power, axis of ethics. That is, you have to consider your relationship between you and knowledge, you and others, or you and society, and you and yourselves. Always try to understand how knowledge, power relation, and our own action play a great role in molding us. Fourth one, generality. The investigation about what constitutes us is specific in nature but has general attributes that continue still now. Everything has a general side. Some things are generally transferred from one generation to another but are transformed in their unique forms. They are specific but yet general. Everything has a general aspect, though they are transferred in unique forms. While analyzing them, take into consideration the three axes: the axis of knowledge, axis of power, and axis of ethics. To bring homogeneity of analysis, look for what people do and how they do it. And the risk is to separate technology and power relation while analyzing. The question that Foucault tries to answer is what kind of reason do we use? What are its historical effects, limits, and dangers? Reason which is purely rational could be dangerous. The rationality of social Darwinism gave rise to racism, which ultimately became the basis of Nazism. Now we understand Nazism as irrational, but this irrationality too was based once on some kind of rationality. This is what Kant called illegitimate use of reason and wanted to eliminate. Foucault also wants the same. But reason is ever changing, and hence following certain doctrines alone could equally be fatal. Reason is ever evolving. What once was rational may not be rational some other time, but we cannot risk being irrational. The one function that philosophy has, according to Foucault, is to understand this double ended nature of reason. We have to understand the fact that reason is necessary and indispensable, but it always comes with its own danger. Hence, enlightenment is a never ending process, and our task is to cultivate an attitude that enables us to know our limits and transgress them, an attitude towards rationality that would continually analyze it and reinvent it. You need to understand that there are no timeless principles of reason.